It is the terrorist atrocity Belgium had feared for months.
Brussel beleefde een dag van terreur en chaos op zijn eigen 9/11.
Le théâtre de guerre est exporté en Europe.
Meer dan een dag na de bloedige aanslagen in Brussel en Zaventem.
As Europe mourns the victims of yet more attacks, imagine a world accepting a new normal.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. These are some of the media stories we're looking at this week. A case of déjà vu in Brussels. It's Paris all over again, both in the details of the story and in the nature of the coverage. Journalism on trial in Morocco, where, for all the promises of freedom of expression, the red lines remain. And Facebook flirts with China as Twitter turns 10 years old. What took place in Brussels this past Tuesday, the bombings that killed 31 people and wounded hundreds more, was one of those mega stories that provoked coverage that went well beyond the event itself. It led to televised talking heads having long discussions about state security and what limits should apply, delving into the issue of immigration as well as the refugees from Syria. And one American channel used Brussels as a way into the debate because there is one in the U.S. over torture. That's what happens when a story is big enough. It travels. And such stories can also reveal much about the news organizations that cover them. Things like news hierarchies, the extent and limits of cultural empathy, as well as double standards. Not that we haven't seen that before. The bombings in Paris happened just 4 months ago, and a pattern is emerging in the way these stories are told. Our starting point this week is Brussels.
This is the new normal now in Europe.
Today's attacks in Brussels really show again how difficult it is to protect soft targets.
Brussel beleefde een dag van terreur en chaos, om zo te zeggen onze eigen 9/11.
Not all news stories are created equal, and no two stories are covered equally. But what does it say about the news industry and how the English language news media see the world that two simple web searches of two similar stories, the attacks in Brussels that killed 31 people, and a car bomb in Ankara 10 days before that killed 37, would yield such dissimilar results?
It's pretty indisputable that there is a hierarchy in terms of, shall we say, Western media coverage of these attacks. It's not to say that there was no coverage of the attacks in Baghdad or in Turkey, but the volume and the tone and the urgency of the coverage was nowhere near what it has been since the Brussels attacks.
Faut-il encore reconsidérer la menace terroriste? Édition spéciale ce soir.
When you compare it to what happened in Beirut or in Baghdad or in Istanbul, and then here in Brussels, it's another world. The first time in Istanbul, it was a huge thing. We send a special correspondent. The second, we hesitate, and the third one, we don't even think about it. So then Brussels, that's different. That's coverage day and night all the time.
The volume of coverage is not even on the same scale. It's actually called special coverage on NBC, and they have special music that goes with it. They create a graphic that goes with the Belgium attacks. I mean, do we have anything similar to that when it comes to the attacks in Turkey? I think that's what we kind of lose when we have these coverage of attacks in other parts of the world outside of the West. And we just kind of think of, well, how many were killed? Just give me a number. And that's it. There isn't this kind of really in-depth empathy.
Stories as big as this one have a habit of spreading beyond borders and bleeding into other areas of debate. Journalists have delved into security angles, some of which are related and some not. As the New York Times put it, it did not take long. Almost as soon as the bombs went off in Brussels came the bitter debate about the influx of migrants from the Middle East and North Africa, even though the two suicide bombers were neither refugees nor immigrants to Belgium. They were born there.
When there is a terror attacks, the obvious agenda which comes on the table is about security. There are some extreme right-wing politicians in Europe copying what happened after 9/11 in the States. I mean, they're pleading for our kind of Patriot Act.
Ik heb gesproken over een Patriot Act in een interview van 10
I think after the attacks in Brussels, that the responsibility of media, but not only media, also politics is immense. Of not spinning only a tough security discourse, but also a society discourse.
Something that I saw in the media that was very striking to me was an image of a young boy who is in the Greek border, hoping to get into Europe, fleeing war, seeking asylum along with his parents. And this boy is holding a sign saying, "Sorry for Brussels." So for me, this is a striking example of how those narratives that we see in the political field, but also more and more in the media, grasp the imagination of people who are in a vulnerable position, who feel that they have to respond to those narratives which equate terrorism with refugees.
This is a special edition of Today, Terror in Brussels.
If turning the story of the attacks into one about immigration policy was a form of hijacking the news for purposes that are political, then what NBC News in the U.S. did took that to another level.
Republican frontrunner Donald Trump joins us now by phone.
The network's morning program transformed Belgium's tragedy into a debate about torture in the U.S.
What would you say would be appropriate in terms of what they can do to him at this moment to get any information they can?
And treated that question as some kind of litmus test for candidates vying for the White House.
When I watched the NBC interview, the way that the anchors seem to be trying to push answers out of the politicians. They almost like they wanted to hear the word torture. And the way that they pressed and pressed.
When you say do whatever they have to do, can you be specific?
Come on, what are you going to do, Trump? What are you going to do? So it's kind of like a dare. And, you know, Trump initially answered in a kind of vague way, but that wasn't good enough for the reporters. They wanted they wanted blood.
Are you in the camp that harsh interrogation, let's use the word torture, works in a case like this?
And there was no attempt by NBC or anybody really to say, well, isn't that sort of horrifying that you're advocating for torturing people?
Torture is not effective. It does put our own soldiers and increasingly our own civilians at risk.
Hillary Clinton said, don't waterboard people. It won't lead to any intelligence gathering success. And so the media is operating within this political context in which torture is, if it's objectionable at all, it's objectionable because it was ineffective. And so this whole conversation was appearing, you know, inside this large moral vacuum.
However, one of the overriding themes of the coverage of Brussels was, despite all those breaking news banners, how familiar it all felt after Paris. That fatigue was expressed in various ways online, messages that were aimed at those responsible for the killings, but also could apply to the news organizations entrusted with reporting the story.
The media are more and more taking the position of setting an agenda. So what does it mean to have the Belgian people, the Brussels people, having a face and a voice, while we can never see the face and the voice and the sorrow of people of Turkey and the people of Istanbul? And what are the audiences expected to do with these very different representations?
You know, we've been trapped in a lot of these sorts of narratives for a very long time now, and it's clearly gotten us nowhere. It's gotten us nowhere in terms of our safety. It's gotten us nowhere in terms of the way that we interact with each other, in terms of creating a more peaceful planet and a more harmonious society. And so I would hope that these media outlets would start to really reflect on the kind of coverage that we need as opposed to the kind of coverage that we're getting.
Other media stories that are on our radar this week. When Russian reporters get killed on the job, relatively few of those cases end up in court, let alone in a conviction, unless they're killed in Ukraine, and one of those allegedly involved is Ukrainian. A little less than 2 years ago, correspondent Igor Kornelyak and sound engineer Anton Voloshin of the Kremlin-owned VGTRK channel were killed in a mortar attack in eastern Ukraine. Their cameraman, Viktor Denisov, captured the attack on video and survived. This past week, a Russian court convicted a Ukrainian national, Nadezhda Savchenko, who was serving in a voluntary battalion at the time, of relaying the journalist's location to the mortar squad. She was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Prosecutors have argued that Savchenko, who was captured and taken into Russia, was driven by political hatred. In the Russian news media, Savchenko is portrayed as a ruthless killer. In parts of Ukraine, she's become a national hero. So depending on where you get your information, she is either a victim of the fog of war or justice has been served. It looks like there's a purge underway at Kenya's largest newspaper, and analysts there say it appears to be political. Over the past 4 months, several senior journalists have left the Daily Nation, including its former editor, Dennis Galava, who was fired in January after writing an end-of-year editorial directed at President Uhuru Kenyatta, headlined, "Mr. President, get your act together." That followed the firing of one of Kenya's best-known political cartoonists, Godfrey Mwampemwa. Gado, as he is known, reportedly said his contract was not renewed because of pressure that came from the top. With a circulation of around 170,000 and a website that gets an estimated 3 million hits a day, the Daily Nation is one of East Africa's most influential newspapers. It's published by the Nation Media Group, which is owned by a British businessman, Prince Karim Aga Khan, the leader of the Ismaili Shia movement. He has multiple business interests in Kenya, including hospitals, hotels, and banks. Analysts there say the paper is going soft on the government and getting rid of critical staff ahead of next year's elections to protect its owner's commercial standing in the country. The Daily Nation did not respond to our email asking for clarification on this story. The People's Daily newspaper, one of the biggest propaganda tools in Beijing's arsenal, has warned the Chinese people of the perils of social media while the world's biggest social media magnate was in the country. In an editorial in the People's Daily, the Communist Party publication, chief editor Yang Zhenwu wrote that the government could, quote, make a historic mistake if it fails to control new media and harness it for propaganda purposes. The editorial came just 2 days after Facebook co-founder Mark Zuckerberg, who was ostensibly in Beijing for the China Development Forum, met with the country's propaganda chief to discuss, according to Facebook, the future of internet development. Facebook has been banned in China ever since 2009, but Zuckerberg's been on a periodic charm offensive, clearly trying to find a way into the world's biggest market. There was no mention of that in Zuckerberg's posts, however. He looked just like any other tourist enjoying the sights, which provoked a lot of online mockery that Zuckerberg must have expected, such as the user who wanted to know the secret of how do you update your Facebook in China. This past week in Morocco, 7 journalists were slated to go to court in 2 separate cases, but their trials were postponed. The allegations against them include threatening state security and questioning the country's territorial integrity. Other Moroccan journalists have been harassed and fined over their reporting. Just a few weeks ago, the Minister of Communication held a news conference boasting about media freedom in the country. And all of this is happening a little more than 5 years after the Arab Spring, which was born in North Africa, threatened to spread to Morocco. King Mohammed VI managed to quell the protests by promising reforms and delivering a new constitution which guaranteed, among other things, freedom of expression. Morocco does have media laws that protect certain freedoms. However, the wording of those laws is so vague, the possible interpretations are so broad that any reporting that crosses the line by offending the king, his officials, raising national security questions, or the status of Western Sahara can land reporters in trouble. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on the journalistic red lines, the red tape that reporters have to deal with, and the red ink on the balance sheet, none of which bode well for the future of journalism in Morocco.
Editorial red lines. Moroccan journalists call them les lignes rouges, and they have a finely tuned sense of where they are and how they are shifting. The lines emanate from Rabat, the capital and seat of Morocco's royal family. Any output that is seen as insulting to the king, his family, or members of his government is punishable by up to 5 years in jail. And those aren't the only punishable media offences.
In my opinion, there are really 2 other red lines that the authorities care about. The first is the issue of Western Sahara. The Moroccan authorities and separatists in the region are locked in a tug-of-war over the disputed territory, and the issue is currently being discussed in the United Nations. Some journalists attempt to question Morocco's position because they think it's necessary to show the other side's opinion, but the government considers this to be provocative. The second issue is with regards to terrorism. Morocco's 2003 anti-terrorism law is exceptional in that it stipulates mass media must not take part in the discussion relating to this issue.
التي تقول بأنه هذه القضايا volonté de terroriser.
The government's aim is to terrorise journalists and to reiterate the famous red lines that we've been talking about for 20 years now. They continue to hound journalists under the same pretext. This has always been the case, but is much more common nowadays.
Ça l'a été, mais c'est devenu de plus en plus courant.
Mati Monjib is president of the Moroccan Association of Investigative Journalism. He and his colleague Hisham Mansouri, along with 5 others, were set to go on trial this past week on charges of threatening state security and failing to report the foreign funding of their citizen journalism project. The trial has been postponed until June 29th. It will be the second trial for Mansouri in just over a year. He was arrested in March 2015 while working on a report about online surveillance and sentenced to 10 months in prison for, of all things, adultery, charges his lawyers say were fabricated. According to Monjib, fabricating charges against journalists has become the modus operandi for the Moroccan authorities.
هذا هو الملف الضخم جدا.
This file is full of cases conjured up by the Moroccan authorities to pressurize independent journalists because they've chosen to express their opinions freely. There are hundreds of pages showing that I've allegedly threatened national security and that I've committed financial crimes.
وأني قمت بجرائم مالية.
Another trial was postponed this week, that of Ali Anouzla, editor-in-chief of the banned Arabic news site Lacom.com. He will be back in court for the 3rd year in a row on April 5th, this time charged with threatening territorial integrity. Anouzla has been in and out of prison since 2013, questioned about every aspect of his work, most recently for an interview he gave to the German newspaper Bild, which quoted him calling Western Sahara occupied territory. Anouzla says it was a mistranslation into German that Bild subsequently corrected, but the court case goes on.
احنا صدمنا معه صراحة لأنه
We gave our support to Ali Anouzla because we believe solidarity with our co-workers is a central principle for us as journalists. However, at the same time, we should seriously consider why the authorities are treating Anouzla in this way. Other magazines and papers have written about this topic without getting into trouble because they approach it with historical context. You need to strike the right balance.
على الأقل إشارات أو صورة أخرى
للحالات ديال المتابعة القضائية الآن.
All these cases against journalists are related to defamation or libel. They are not related to any red lines, but to rules agreed upon in the UN-mandated International Covenant of Social and Political Rights, which states that it is possible to restrict freedom of the press in cases that affect other people's lives, in matters of national security, public order, public health, or morals.
Over the years, the Moroccan media have seesawed between periods of relative freedom and tight restrictions. In 2011, as uprisings erupted across the Arab world, King Mohammed VI sought to keep the calm with a revamped constitution that promised, among many other things, freedom of expression and a variety of media protections. Whether the king really wanted reform or was just trying to avoid being swept up in the Arab Spring remains an open question.
ورأينا أنه خلال كل سنة 2011
We noticed through 2011, 2012 and parts of 2013, freedom of media increased, not only on social media networks like Twitter and Facebook, but also in printed and digital journalism. However, from the beginning of 2013, the situation for the media here regressed.
يعني بدأ التراجع في صيف 2013.
The Minister of Communication has a very different view. Every year, the Minister hosts a press conference in which he outlines the progress his department has made. We spoke to him straight after the event. He was at pains to defend the government's record on press freedom and referred us to the new press code, which has been promised for 12 years now, but still hasn't made it past draft form.
بمعنى أن القانون شكل إطار.
The draft press code has formed a framework reinforcing freedom of speech, establishing media protections, and providing the social and political conditions necessary for the free practice of journalism. The government's record in the field of freedom of the press is honorable and positive. 2015 was unique, not only in terms of the new laws that were passed, but also not one newspaper was confiscated, not one website was seized, and not one journalist was imprisoned by the Court of Appeals.
النهائي بسجن الصحفيين.
Mr. El Halfi likes to talk about last year, but is less forthcoming about the way this year has begun, with all those journalists on trial. And then there's the money. New media investment rules in Morocco do not permit any foreign financing. And at the same time, domestic advertising funds are largely controlled by the government, which makes survival a real challenge for outlets like Ali Amar's Le Desk, that regularly pushes the editorial limits. Launched last September, the site has already published stories about the King's secretary hiring a PR firm to polish his image, a scandal at one of the country's leading banks, and the failure of the government's agricultural initiative, Morocco Vert.
Economic asphyxiation is a powerful weapon that has been used by the regime to destroy and eliminate independent newspapers over the past few years. Today, in an environment of extreme fragility, one has to be very courageous to publish articles that might turn investors away. So we at Le Desk are in a unique situation. I don't think anyone here has tried to do what we're doing, which is a paywall, an economic model based essentially on subscriptions. We've been online for 3 months and are in a trial run.
5 years on from the uprisings that sparked the King's new constitution, Moroccans are back on the streets. Reporters are still awaiting a new press code. Subversive media outlets are being starved of vital revenue streams. And dissident journalists are facing trial after trial. This is Morocco in 2016, and the battle lines are still red.
There are some news outlets trying to get past the red lines and the taboos that hinder journalism in Morocco. We mentioned the French-language news site Le Desk, launched by Ali Amar, and some of the stories it's broken. Le Desk has also been running an ongoing investigation into government internet surveillance of Moroccan citizens. Aside from subscriptions, Le Desk says it has financial backing to the tune of $750,000 from various investors who have collaborated with Amar on his media ventures. Then there is Telkel, a French-language weekly magazine founded in 2010 by Ahmed Benchemzi. Benchemzi has been repeatedly pressured by the Moroccan government, and in 2009, Telkel disappeared from the newsstands temporarily after it published an opinion poll on the first 10 years of King Mohammed's reign. Telkel started an Arabic-language edition, Nishan, in 2010, but it went out of business after the government leaned on companies to withdraw their advertising. We touched on the Arabic-language news site Lekome.com, which was founded by Ali Anouzla in 2010 and made its name by publishing stories about the cost of maintaining the royal family and on the king's habit of taking long vacations. Lekome was subsequently blocked in May of 2014, but it relaunched as Lekome2.com in August of last year, which, as of this writing, is still accessible online in Morocco. Finally, we saw once again this past week in the coverage of the bombings in Brussels what an essential component Twitter has become in the world of journalism. As it happens, this week also marked the 10th anniversary of the very first tweet, which read, "Just setting up my Twitter." It was sent out by Twitter's co-founder, Jack Dorsey. Now, by his own admission, even Dorsey wasn't sure exactly what it was that he was setting up, what Twitter would become. But today, it boasts 320 million active users and more than 1 billion unique visits per month. And for a service that only allows for 140 characters per tweet, it's broken some pretty big news stories. The one in Pakistan, for example, when an IT worker unwittingly tweeted about the U.S. military raid that killed Osama bin Laden. Then there are the hashtags that have galvanized millions, like Bring Back Our Girls in Nigeria and Black Lives Matter in the U.S. We leave you with a compilation of what we think are some of the most important tweets of the past decade. And we'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.